Commissioner Smith?
Here. Sorry, I was taking a drink of my beverage.
Commissioner Nocita? Commissioner Neely?
Here.
Commissioner White?
Here.
Commissioner Norris?
Here.
Commissioner Crawford?
Here.
Commissioner Shaw? Commissioner Walters? Commissioner Peterson?
Here.
Sheriff Slack?
Sure. I wanted to just briefly, before we get started, make some comments about our last meeting. We did kind of have some heated discussion going, and we had, at times, when we had speakers trying to speak, we had people trying to override some of their comments or make comments in the background. And I just asked all of us to sign up for a card if we want to speak, and then when it's your turn to speak, you'll have free open opportunity to speak, and when not, let's please hold down the extraordinary comments and whatever. So, and Mr. Frazier wanted to have a...
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a few remarks about urban renewal and my observations of it. I'm still new enough to not be one of the inmates, but I'm on my way. So I thought it would be an appropriate time for me to give you some of my first impressions about urban renewal in your community. It seems to me that there's a lot of opinion in the community and even some controversy on the commission here about the use of urban renewal, but I haven't encountered a lot of resistance to urban renewal as a tool. What we have here is an urban renewal commission. We don't have an anti-urban renewal commission. And so my assumption is that you've made a wise choice in trying to use this tool to benefit your community. And when I think about urban renewal as a concept, there are certainly places where urban renewal arguably has been stretched and contorted into places where maybe it shouldn't be. And one of those that occurs to me is, for example, I personally believe it's not the best use of urban renewal as a concept when you're using urban renewal in an unincorporated area that's not urban and it's already new and it doesn't need to be renewed. So I have an issue with that. That makes it difficult for cities to be successful with their districts, and I think the county is only as strong as its weakest city. So I have some concerns about that. However, Oregon City, you know, we hear over and over, we say it so many times, I think, we're the oldest city west of the Rocky Mountains, and I've been saying that in my head enough in the last 6 months that it's just become rote with me. But what that really means is we're the oldest urban area west of the Rocky Mountains. And if you think about that as our history, and that's where we are and who we are, if we're the oldest urban area, the oldest should need renewal more than anyone else. And all I have to do is go to the promenade and look over the terrace at some of those rooftops that don't have a green roof concept, but they do have some green on the roof. And I see that and I think to myself, this is a perfect palette for a wise and astute use of urban renewal as a key tool to the future success of your city. So the other note I have is that I know there's controversy on the Rivers and the Cove projects, and I think we spend 80% of our time on 20% of our disagreement. And I'd like to see us working together trying to change that, where we're spending the opposite. 20%, at least 20% of the time on 20% of the disagreement. Because when I look at some of the successes, and many of you know these better than me, but the two that stand out in my mind are one that I've been pretty active in working with is your Main Street program. This is rapidly becoming one of the most successful Main Street programs in the state of Oregon. It's getting national recognition, and this is something that I hear universal agreement about among you that have talked to me about this program. So there's an example of something we agree on. We should be celebrating the points of agreement that we have like that, and try to keep those in the back of our minds when we're talking about the places where we disagree. And another one that I want to mention, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit because it's timely and because we have, you know, a struggling economy in our state. And when I think about this drug handle project, I've been chasing money for projects like this my entire career. And on a per capita basis, I've never netted a fish this big. For $22 million, this is really, really exceptional. It's going to employ hundreds of people in the design and construction. It's going to have ancillary benefits throughout your community, whether they're dining on the hilltop or buying shoestrings downtown or gasoline. this is going to have ancillary impacts on your community that are positive for job creation for the next couple of years. Most of you know it's going to be ready for bid in the spring, and then construction will start shortly thereafter. And I also want to mention a little bit about teamwork, because it feels like we haven't so far, because of the controversy around these two projects and our tendency to sort of get snagged up on those controversies, we can do more as a team. And when it comes to this jug handle project, I know Mr. Leland's firm was involved to some extent, but the real principles for making this thing happen were two women that I work with and respect a great deal, and one is Nancy Crushauer and the other one is Mayor Norris. And as I researched these projects and tried to learn more about the jug handle, because I do anticipate we're going to have some questions. It's like remodeling your bathroom while you're still living in the house. It's no fun while it's happening, but when it's done, you really like it. And I think that's what we're going to have with the jug handle. But what was so exceptional about the teamwork that these two employed on this project was Nancy is out here with ODOT, working with their staff, working with our staff, constantly trying to keep this on the front burner, making sure that from an engineering perspective, it was a doable project. It didn't get too far expanded. I think it started out at 32 million and ended up at 22, and I have a word to say about how that happened. But that was Nancy's technical expertise coming to bear. On the other side of it, we could have the best project in the world, and if we don't have the money, it doesn't get done. So last night, in just reviewing the history of how this happened, I know that Mayor Norris lobbied the county delegation a couple of different times on two JPEC trips all the way to Washington, D.C. to lobby for money there. One of my staff described Mayor Norris as polite but relentless. And I think that's probably an accurate statement, because I know when she asked me for things, I experienced that firsthand. But it's still effective leadership, and she went to the governor's office. She talked to Speaker Dave Hunt, and at, 11 or 12 at night one night, we started negotiating the final numbers. And what I thought was really funny is the comment that, well, I grabbed at 22 million and I called Nancy and hoped she could make it work. So that's not a very sophisticated engineering analysis for the number, but we are going to make it work. And so these are examples of when we're working together. That's 2 or 3 people working together for 22 million. Think what the power of 8 or 10 of us working together could do. So please try not to get hung up on I know some of these are the same players and the same projects, and you may even have the same objections, but I'm new and I don't know what those objections are, and I'm committed to trying to resolve them so that we can do what you want with your urban renewal district. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your forbearance.
Thank you. We appreciate those words. Do we have some citizens?
Mayor North, Commissioner North,
the only thing I was going to say is that David's comments about, I appreciate all that you said. When you talk about Oregon City being the oldest incorporated, the oldest city, you have to say incorporated city, because we are not the oldest city in Oregon. So it's as old as we just got incorporation papers in earlier. So just have to remember that word. So sorry, that's a very minor comment.
How could you want to say
I hear about it from them all the time, so I try to use it.
Do we have, my screen's not showing any comments. Okay, so we move on to future agenda items. Okay, adoption of the agenda. Do I see any? We're all okay? All right. General business. Item 5A.
If they have a comment and they come forward.
Yeah, fill a card out later. Come on up. And give the city.
Sorry, I thought you had item 5C, and we're not to 5C yet.
This is just general citizen comments, not related to a topic. So, okay? All right, that's a confusion. Okay, item 5A, Urban Renewal Projects Update, Commission report.
Thank you, Chair Slack and members of the Commission. Today we want to spend a substantial amount of time talking about the Urban Renewal Program. Dave Leland and Brian Benjamin from Leland Consulting are here, as is Andy Parks. And they're going to cover a number of issues tonight. First, we're going to go and speak a little bit to the background and context of the Urban Renewal District. Talk a little bit about the current development climate. I noticed in a lot of discussion, particularly in reference to the Coven Rivers projects, about the current economy and how it affects those projects. So, Mr. Leland will talk some about that. We'll have project updates on the Coven Rivers, exactly where those are. So we've actually been making some progress on those projects. We'll give a summary of some of the other projects that Leland Consulting is working on behalf of Oregon City. One is the sustainability grant, and the other is a rail quiet zone for downtown. And then finally, we'll summarize the recommended steps. One agenda question that I have for you, Chair Slack, is the item 5B, which is the termination and conditional reinstatement agreement. I believe as a part of this initial presentation, Steve Janik, Council for Urban Renewal, will be summarizing that agreement. It's listed as a separate item, but I think it will probably flow better in the discussion to have it combined with this first item, if that works for the Commission.
Okay. 5B. 5B.
Oh, okay.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Leland.
So Slack and members of the Commission, I'm Dave Leland, Leland Consulting Group. We are your advisors for the Urban Renewal Agency. It's a role we have played for approximately 7 years. In effect, we have been the staff for the Urban Renewal Agency over the past 7 years, working on a variety of projects. This evening's presentation is a status report, as we were requested to do earlier this year, and so I'm going to take you through our progress, what we've discovered, and we will conclude with some recommendations based on the findings. The presentation overview is, I'd like to go into a little bit of background. There's new people on the Commission, there's new people living in the city, how we entered into this process, some updates on the financial status of Urban Renewal. I've got Andy Parks here, CPA and owner of GEL Oregon. Then we have updates on the rivers and the cove. Steve Janik, counsel for the Urban Renewal Agency, is here. And then we have some other projects and programs that we've been working on parallel to the rivers and the cove. And this, I will then conclude with recommendations and next steps. Back in about 2004, possibly 2005, no, it was 2004, we adopted some economic development goals. I'll read them. I think they're important. These become the basis for which we measure how to evaluate projects. They have to do with enhancing the community's appeal and attractiveness, to provide a growth environment, to leverage public dollars when working in public-private partnerships, create increment with each investment, or ensure that private investment follows public investment, which is the pattern that most cities undertake and also realize success. We want to increase the community's assessed value, bring diversification of both business and industry, increase the number and the quality of jobs, and develop businesses with staying power. These were adopted back in 2004, and as I say, we have been following these adopted directives. The strategy that emerged when we were first retained by the city to look at economic development, because it was a time when there really wasn't a great deal of industrial development, was to lead with the city's assets. And one of those assets was the designation as one of Region 2040's 7 regional centers. A regional center is essentially an urban hub. They're located on the periphery of the urban area, and they serve as a pulse point for a number of smaller cities nearby. This has been a fundamental part of Region 2040, which has now been in existence for approximately 15 years. Up until about 2004, there was not a lot of effort made to really implement the regional center status. So what that meant was to look at the big picture and the role that Oregon City could play in the context of the major urban place in the southeast section of the region, to outreach to the outlying communities of Canby and Damascus, Gladstone, West Lynn, and others, and also to build partnerships. I know during that period and up to the present, there was a lot of effort by Mayor Norris, to reach out to the mayors and the elected officials in these other governments, as well as being quite involved with the regional level in terms of building that relationship. And then, as Mr. Frazier said, a lot of ongoing contact with the state and federal delegation and legislation. So it's really building and branding Oregon City into a sub-regional role. A little bit of a timeline. So we started in 2004, and one of the projects that began almost at the same time was the Mills Corporation. The Mills Corporation at that time had a purchase option on the Rossman landfill site. Mills was a national real estate developer in the retail sector. We worked very closely with them for over 2 years, rather intensely, trying to put together a DDA, a development and disposition agreement. Made very good progress, I would say, all in all. And then the company at the corporate level, which had nothing to do with Oregon City or the project, went into bankruptcy. And as a result, the project was terminated, and we had to start over with a new organization. So in 2006, we were encouraged to go out and recruit other developers who could bring about some of the stated goals of the urban renewal area and the adopted policies. And that led into discussions with CenterCal at the Rivers and Pacific Property Search at the Cove. 2009 to the present, during the recession, which has had an effect, I'm going to talk about that as we go forward, is we have been continuing to work in these partnerships in project planning, negotiation, entitlements. City Hall got acquired and remodeled, and really quite a vast number of projects have been implemented over these 7 years. In principle, the goal is to invest in major public-private partnerships that ideally would leverage the public dollar and public policy and public objectives with an average of 4 to 5 private dollars. And you've heard me say before, we've been the advisor on over 80 downtowns across America, and we find on average it's about 4 or 5 private dollars to 1 public dollar. Rarely do you see a whole bunch of them precisely in that range, but on average, that seems to be the pattern. That in turn creates additional tax increment, which can then be used to invest in additional public projects or public-private projects, that it becomes an investment pool, if you will. It begins to stimulate and continues to stimulate the economy and placemaking. And if there's any questions, please interrupt me, please. So the regional center concept is about leverage, and leverage is attracting catalyst developments that in turn can create tax increment leverage. This is particularly true on raw land, which is both the case of the Rivers and the Cove sites, which in turn then create investment through tax increment, which can spin off into other investment priorities. So we were instructed by the commission to recruit experienced developers, which we did. We had to do with 2 very difficult properties: the Cove, which has a number of challenges in terms of cleanup and floodplain and other problems and materials that were dumped there over time, and of course the landfill, which was a former active landfill for both organic and inorganic waste. And there has been consistent encouragement by Oregon City and its leadership for these 2 projects over the years. These are true public-private partnerships. And it's taken a long time. Were it not for the recession, I would say both projects would be built now or well on their way. But the recession slowed down just about everything in the country, for that matter. In fact, the only other major project under construction in Oregon right now of a retail nature is the Fred Meyer complex in Wilsonville that we were advisors on as well. These 2 projects are probably, you're the only city in the state with this sort of major investment opportunity at this time. So the idea here was to take these two projects, and we took them because they were extremely large and they had to be dealt with. And they also were large enough that we could attract major investment and have major benefits. We also know from experience, and I'll get into this in a little bit, that when you put in a major project like the rivers, for example, it has a rippling effect, a halo effect on properties around it. And that has always been the case with major retail concentrations, and we have done some forecasting on that. And we also wanted to cure some of the brownfield conditions while creating public amenities, such as the Esplanade and the waterfront park. In your 2010-2011 planning session, you agreed to facilitate cove development, continue your efforts to develop a DDA and implement development of the rivers, to provide the Urban Renewal Commission with work product and due diligence on the cove, and we're going to talk about all of that this evening, and update the URC on developments at Blue Heron. There's not been a lot to report there. We have done very little in that area. And also to refine and adopt storefront guidelines in the downtown, which has been extremely successful. I think last year alone came something like 20 or 22 new businesses into the downtown, which is really quite a remarkable accomplishment. Also to fund the National Heritage Program. Our scope of work in 2010 had to do with continuing this district strategy, working with Dan Brentlaw and other department heads and the city manager, as well as yourselves, to move forward, if possible, with a development agreement at the Rossman site, to continue to forward development at the Cove, to explore governance and standards that would assure quality development in the downtown. That's a piece of work that we're going to touch on briefly, but it is incomplete, and we would hope to get back to you with some recommendations before the end of the year. And then assist staff with updates to the urban renewal plan and make presentations as requested. I'm not going to read this list. This is one page of accomplishments over the past 7 years. There are many more. By the way, this PowerPoint, I believe, will go up on your website so people at home and people in the audience can have copies of it. I think that will be done after the meeting. I believe that's standard procedure. So the jug handle went in, as Mr. Fraser said, the state allocation of $22 million, which really is quite an accomplishment. We were working very closely with Mayor Norris and Nancy Krushauer. Part of the argument, the strategy there was to tie the public investment in infrastructure to the creation of jobs which would come with the rivers and the Cove, and I'll get into the job production forecasts a little later in the presentation. And in addition, it's to it was to open the way to be able to accommodate the traffic that would come from these developments, but at the same time reduce congestion, since the 213-205 intersection was reaching a point of very poor service, and also to improve pedestrian and bicycle activity in and around that portion of the urban renewal area. Now we'll move into the development context. This is one of the slowest 2-year periods for retail in more than a decade. The rivers, the planned construction at the rivers would be actually greater than the combined total of all retail development in the metropolitan area for 2 years. It's that significant a project. And so we're now beginning to see movement in the retail sector. It's been very flat, particularly over the past 2 years. Some of the big boxes that were vacated around the country are now getting picked up for other uses. We do see some national retailers who are beginning to put up new stores. I believe, don't hold me to this, but I believe Target said they were going to build 40 new stores in 2011. And there's some other major retailers that are starting to move again. The same thing's been true with regard to apartments and multifamily. It has slowed down. There's normally about 1,200 units a year. It's half of that in 2010. What is encouraging, though, is the classic apartment renters are the households in the 25 to 34-year-old age range, and there is a bubble about to go into the demographic pipeline, the pig in the python, as we call it. And so more and more of that age group will be looking for housing over the next 5 to 10 years. So the apartment starts nationally should begin picking up as that demographic accelerates. In terms of the market value of these projects, the Urban Renewal District today has a market value of $142 million. If you add the rivers to that, that brings the market value up to $332 million. And if you add the rivers and the cove together, it brings it up to almost $500 million at $494 million. So there's a dramatic impact that comes with these two projects, which was the intent in the first place for recruiting these organizations and moving these projects forward. In terms of property tax receipts over the next 20 years, Urban Renewal, as it presently sits, would produce about $53 million in tax receipts, with the rivers alone about $105 million, and with the rivers and the cove around $145 million. Again, quite a rather dramatic increase that comes with sizable projects of this nature. The ratio of public to private dollars, you recall, I just said a few moments ago that on average we find in the many downtowns we've worked that it's about one public dollar to every 4 to 5. For example, at the last meeting there was a presentation on a housing project at 12th and Main. It was about a 1 to 3.6 ratio. The rivers is forecast based on the numbers that we've been working with at about 10.8 to 1. And the cove would be about 16.2. So there's a very high ratios in terms of leverage. And what it does is it creates increment coming back, and Andy Parks is going to talk about that in just a moment. In terms of job creation, right now in the Urban Renewal District, as of 2008, there's around 3,000 jobs. With the rivers, that jumps up to 5,356 jobs. And with the rivers and the cove, it jumps up to 7,000 jobs. And Oregon and Oregon City, because we're one of the highest unemployments in the country, really needs jobs. And it's layered in here by construction jobs and permanent jobs, and then there's the indirect ratio that when you add a certain number of jobs, it in turn creates spin-off jobs. More restaurants, more banks, more personal services, more shops. And all of those have employment. So the ripple effect when something like the rivers goes in is what happens to the investment incentive around that property. When you put $190 million, we've used $190 million. I talked to Senator Cal today. They think it's closer to $210 million. John Paul Wardy, one of the property partners, is in Southern California, and Fred Bruning, unfortunately, is home with the H1N1 flu. So he's bedridden at the moment. We wish him a quick recovery. But we did look at what is the ripple effect of investment that could likely come. We took each property one at a time. We made assumptions about floor area ratios and densities and appropriate uses and so on. And there's no guarantee this will happen, but if patterns continue as they have in the past, when a major investment goes in, such as the rivers, it does have this ripple or halo effect that causes others nearby to take advantage of the traffic that comes in, the patronage, the customers. And in fact, I think from talking to some of the businesses in the downtown, part of the reason for coming into downtown Oregon City, in addition to its own attraction, is the anticipation that there would be more market share as a result of the rivers. So we ran this out. If you take the on the far right, right here, we've got the rivers. We used 190, which is a little more conservative, 162. So that's around $352 million in those two projects. We then took all those properties adjacent to the rivers, which is, this is retail, office, residential, hotel, other. And there's another approximately 335 to $400 million of investment. Now, we used fairly conservative factors here, and we discounted. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes. So here's the 352 of the cove and the rivers together. Here's the 409 and the 335, which is a spread. It's there's no guarantee. I'm just saying that if patterns follow, we'll see some, hopefully, all of that. So the numbers get to be very sizable, somewhere between 6 and 7.5, almost 7 to $760 million of total capital investment in the downtown, which is really quite remarkable. There are very few downtowns in the region that can even look at this. For one thing, 92% of all real estate in town and regional centers in our region are 1 acre or less in size. So to have two sizable properties like this is really quite unusual. The only other one I know of is Beaverton, and it's largely in the form of car lots. So in terms of looking at economic development and these two projects, we feel that every one of your development goals which have been adopted are met by these two projects. And they are, I think we can say safely that, and confidently, that they do all of the things that you had hoped to do with regard to your adopted goals. We'll talk about the development context. I'd like Andy Park to come up. And you want to sit here, Andy? Okay.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I've been working with Dave and the City Commission and Urban Renewal Agency staff on this project really back to 2004 as well, and including doing, I think, something that if you're watching other urban renewal agencies throughout the state in terms of them trying to either set up plans or make major amendments to plans. They're having considerable challenges in doing so, as did yourself, but you're able to accomplish that in increasing your plan from 29 million to 129 million, I think back in 2005, 2006. The financial work that's been done recently here to update the projections and so forth indicate that the financial margins are such that it's become a little bit more challenging, but it's still very, very much a doable investment. The things have tightened in the sense that lenders, with Oregon Urban Renewal, previously you recall maybe a bond issue back in 2009, 2010, as a $10 million issue that allowed for a 20-year amortization and with a 15-year balloon. They're no longer offering that type of term with 15 years straight amortization. That ultimately is going to increase your debt approximately 20%, and thereby reducing your capacity about 20%. Also, the real estate values in the district, which have had a very good run in terms of percentage increase over prior years in the neighborhood of 7%. That number for fiscal year 2010 declined to 3 and about 1/10%. So I've updated the model to reflect 3% for the next 3 years and then 4% thereafter. Again, very conservative information on the underlying information. Plugging that information into the model, looking only at, this is the Cove alone. The debt service associated with that is approximately $950,000 per year for a 15-year term. The initial years here are less. You have a line of credit that you're drawing down, and that's such a lesser amount on a slower interest rate as well. What's hidden here is when the increment starts to come in, and it would follow along something like that. So you have a phase in of the apartments and then the condos that are occurring really out here in 2017, and then the last development occurring out here in 2020 in terms of going on the tax rolls. The area here in the darker green is money over and above what's needed to pay for the debt service and ultimately available for other projects. On a 20-year basis, and these forecasts go out to 2030, there'd be roughly $40 million generated from this development, about $14.4 million in debt, representing a little over $25 million in, again, money available for other programs within the district. And at the 2030 timeline, you'd be expecting to generate somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.3 million of property tax off of this particular development. Okay. The rivers, on the other hand, this is showing them developing beginning in 2012 and going on to the tax rolls fully, I believe, in around 2014, 2015. The structure of this particular borrowing and deal with the rivers involves them upfronting or fronting the costs and then having a debt issue that is ultimately taken out by the Urban Renewal Agency once they've created the increment. And that annual debt service is around $1.9 million. And the amount that would be generated is approximately 2.5 in the first year that this is fully on the tax assessment. And again, that's at using the 190 real market value, and Dave indicated that number might be as much as 10% greater. Now, this particular property also projects to be approximately 25 million additional net dollars available for other projects within the agency's boundaries over a 20-year period, and generating around 3.9 million at 2030. Yes. If we were to combine these two, this is, the darker color is your revenue line, the debt service, the lighter shade of purple, again, generating around $92 million total over a 20-year period and about $41 million expense. So a little over $51 million ultimately available to the agency for other programs and projects within the area. 51 million. Yeah, over the next 20 years, this would generate over and above the debt service.
And on other projects.
And then other programs, yes. If we combine the two, and recognize this does not include the spin-off development that Dave referred to earlier, and that number is, if it's anywhere close to correct, it's a huge number. $600 to $700 million would generate around $12 million a year in property taxes. These properties right here, combined with your existing value, in 2030 would be generating around $11 million. The property taxes generated versus the debt is what, 145 to 55, so $90 million. The reason I really didn't go past 20 years is $90 million would more than fund your current plan. Your total again was 129. You spent much of that in the investment in these particular projects would take that below 90 million. So this would effectively, without amendment to the plan, could result in ending in, you see the annual taxes at 2030 is 10.9 million, which would then go back to the overlapping tax jurisdictions, which include the state.
Per year.
Per year.
So 10.9 million would go back to the city for schools and everything else after this program.
And presently that number is a little less than 2 million. So it's kind of jaw dropping. So this is what the plan looks like right now if nothing happened with the rivers in the cove, and again a very conservative 3-4% growth over the period. I would expect this to end up being greater than this, but kind of shows you what might be considered a worst case scenario. It would be approximately $40 million worth of dark shaded area available for other projects. Want to point out to you too, you see on the debt service that little bump in 2023 that goes above the up to $4 million. That's the balloon payment that we have on the existing debt that is again on a 20-year amortization with a 15-year balloon payment. And again, the taxes in 2030 under this scenario would be 3.7 million a year versus the 10.9. And this is just another representation of where your revenue would be annually, again with the rivers cove versus without. And I think for the overlapping taxing jurisdictions that have been following this issue, I think this maybe graphically explains what all these parties are in this for. I would think, and you're looking at a little over $2 million coming in presently, and if you were to just draw that line straight across, the blue line as it's extended out to the line that's the $2 million line. So if you took this blue line out here, compared it to, let's just say $2 million, it's this shaded area here, which is less than a couple million dollars a year is what they would otherwise see in growth. And this is the additional property tax money that would ultimately be generated as a result of the investment this agency is considered. which is or about $7 million a year.
Mr. Parks will be available for questions as we go through this. If I could ask Mr. Janet to join me. So the next component is an update. I thought Mr. Bruin would be here. As I said earlier, he's ill. So I'll go through some of this, and then Steve may have some comments. We do have a draft DDA. Some details. This is a 66-acre site. It's owned by Park Place Development. Scott Parker, I don't know if Scott is. He is, okay, he's right behind me. The project developer, as you all know, is CenterCal LLC. It is a landfill, unstable soils. We have methane to deal with, and piles and significant grading are required. It's not entirely unlike the Bridgeport site, which had similar conditions prior to its development. It's intended for regional retail uses, and its advantages include its significant parcel size inside a regional center, the only property of its size that I'm aware of in the region, within a regional center. And it has excellent access and will with the jug handle improvements and its very high visibility, which are essential for retail development. Following the recession, there was a slowdown. Some of the anchor tenants pulled back, waiting to see what would happen. And since then, negotiations have resumed involving the Oregon City staff, department heads, both Urban Renewal and Public Works, Economic Development, CenterCal, Steve Janik of Wall Janik LLP, and your Urban Renewal Consultants, Leland Consulting Group. And so we have been working over the past couple of, really the past year, I would say more than anything, on project scale, the uses, modifying the site plan, looking at transportation infrastructure, because the deal did change as a result of the $22 million coming in to the jug handle, looking at funding and timing for development. Let me go through this. Okay. So we do have a draft DDA. It is not fully resolved. Steve can talk to that point. We're not asking for action tonight. Obviously, you've not seen the agreement, and you need time to study it. But I would say that we have generally broad agreement between the parties on the deal points in terms of the negotiations, which are fairly intense over the past couple of months. It could be ready in several weeks. CenterCal says it is prepared to sign a DDA. They are working ahead. They're in tenant negotiations, and I want to come back to that in just a moment. They are making some site plan revisions, and they would bring those back in as part of the negotiations. And they're also involved in tenant negotiations and recruitment. And on that point, I might ask Mr. Fraser to make a comment.
I wanted to let the commission know that we have engaged developers, discussions that are interested in that site. Something they read in the Daily Journal is that they're published that they were looking at most of the, I think they also reported on it in the county and some other sites that they were asking us not to build any of those discussions until the news broke last week because they're concerned about points on top of the acquisition, and they also have concerns about but they have a significant number of local vendors who report on that show. And we need to create a and a big store in my hometown, Kansas City. It's 3 different sizes. And one of them is around 85,000 square feet. The other model is around 100, and their largest one is 105. Typically, a 2-story. I haven't seen any manufacturing like that, but they have asked questions about the site and they have such a case of parties that they don't recognize you. They don't.
Microphone.
Sorry, they also were not, that's a big difference. I can hear myself think now. They also are not ready to sign a letter of intent or anything of that nature because they still have other details to work out and have some internal approvals that they would have to do. And I think they're just interested in knowing whether we're interested. So I want to leave that with you. That's
Cabela's is an interesting organization. They're one of the largest sporting good retailers in America. What's interesting is they have over 200 suppliers of goods that are manufactured in the state of Oregon. So the ripple effect in terms of state employment is really quite attractive. And they are quite interested, and as Mr. Fraser said, there's a lot of terms to be worked out. They are interested in the relationship with the rivers because of the other stores that would be there and the collective draw that would come from the other stores in the lifestyle center. I talked to John Paul Wordy today several times. They're continuing to work on their pro forma. I also talked to Fred Bruning. They realized that the construction costs have dropped down, but the revenues have dropped down too. And what Fred said was they're continuing to talk to major retailers. They think that the rents, the achievable rents, are going to get stronger in the next 6 months. They're going to get much stronger in the next 12 months, and it's going to take that kind of time to work through the details of the lease negotiations with the tenants. This is common practice. It does take time. The concern is, though, of course, is the potential for losing tenants if we can't move this forward, because some will seek locations elsewhere. I do this, or? Okay. So some of the current obligations per the draft DDA is they have to complete development of the entire property, including brownfield redevelopment, and there's some off-site public improvements, predominantly in the form of transportation improvements. They have a minimum requirement of 650,000 square feet of space, retail, restaurant, entertainment. They did tell me yesterday that they thought there could be an office component that they're looking at. They have to have at least 15,000 square feet of public plazas, which would be in the lifestyle center, and we have some illustrations. A 10-screen cinema. The cinema is very important to the lifestyle center. If any of you have been to Bridgeport, the cinema becomes a very important anchor in a lifestyle center. And they have to obtain all required permits from all agencies, including any impacts on wetlands. Part of the DDA requires that they have to be comparable in quality and design to antennas to Bridgeport Village and/or Cascade Station. They need to embrace some of the historic elements that are representative of the end of the Oregon Trail. And they are willing to pay for and complete transportation improvements estimated at $17.6 million, which would be reimbursed later by the Urban Renewal area agency. And I should say it's 17.6 or the lesser amount of actual costs. So it's not a fixed amount, but that's a cap. And they have to fund the project and the brownfield remediation. But what Fred told me today, Fred Bruning, the president, he said, since we started our company, we've never failed to complete a project that we undertook. And some of these were done in times of high unemployment, such as Cascade Station, when unemployment was 10%. He says, we continue to have strong tenant interest. And he was very pleased that we could talk about Cabela's, even though it's not firm, the interest is strong on both parties. While rents are lower today, lower construction costs will make up for a large portion of the gap, and an improving economy next year should help to make up the balance. He talked about family wage jobs of department managers, store managers, restaurant owners, commission salespeople in the 40,000 to 100,000 per person range. And then you have a lot of the workers. Projects such as this are candidly where young people learn how to work, and it's also a place where the retired can work, and today that's very important to the retired population. So shopping centers serve a part of the labor force that sometimes gets neglected. Obligations of the city are to acquire certain rights of way having to do with transportation improvements And once the project is substantially complete, to repay the transportation costs, as I mentioned previously. There's also a 3-acre agency transfer in the amount of $400,000. And that's my summary on the rivers. Steve does have a draft development and disposition agreement, which we will leave with you this evening. I mean, literally, we were working until 2 o'clock this afternoon on all these agreements, so we did not have a chance to get to them sooner. And we don't assume this.
Oh, I'm sorry. You just finished your sentence.
No, it's okay, Tim.
So that 3-acre agency property is at the 1810 Washington?
Correct. Anything you want to add? Okay. So Steve is here if you have questions. Moving forward then into the Cove. The Cove is a mixed-use active waterfront. It's 109 acres. The program calls for 220 apartments. Ed Garrow is here this evening, and I'm going to ask Ed to speak in just a minute here. It's planned for 180 waterfront condos, a medical office building of approximately 80,000 square feet, office and restaurants of about 58,000 square feet, a public esplanade, plaza, and restaurants which would be in public ownership and use, and a trail on the river edge. There's a complete cleanup and complete restoration of the site, which is in some challenges. And boat and condo slips, a yacht club, water sports center for children, canoe lodge, places for public events and the like. We then move into where we are here, and Steve, you want to do this? You want me to have
I'll be glad to talk about this. Members of the commission, as you may recall, we signed a disposition and development agreement with Clackamas Cove LLC, which is a partnership at that time between Pacific Property Search that had been pursuing this project for about the prior 3 years, and partner Slayton Construction. That was signed in September of 2009. To refresh your recollection, the way the deal was basically structured was there were going to be 2 sets of conditions, and when the first set of conditions was met, then the city would fund out of a credit line that it had approximately $3 million, and the $3 million went to acquire 2 pieces of land, one from Glacier and one from Parker, and the other portion of the money went to acquire, or in effect reimburse the developers for the entire work product that they had produced, all the engineering, architecture, other work, which was about $1.7 million. Then there was to be a second set of conditions, and that second set of conditions had to be met before the city would then fund another $7 million. And the use of the $7 million would be to deal with all the difficult conditions of the site right now, the work necessary to get it ready for the development for the buildings that were contemplated here. That included recontouring the land area going down to the bank of the cove, a lot of work in water in the cove, dealing with remediation of certain environmental issues, etc. Now, what happened was the first set of conditions were met, and in the fall of 2009, we closed the first portion of the transaction. So the city acquired ownership of these 2 parcels of land necessary to complete the development area that any developer is going to need. You also got a security interest in the work product that I described before. Then we stepped back and waited to see if the second set of conditions were met. They were to be met initially by April of this year, and then got extended until July, and they were not met. The conditions that were not met were critical to the appropriateness of the city going forward and funding the second increment of $7 million. Those conditions can be summarized as follows. They had to be under construction with a 220-unit apartment project, and they had to have recorded for that project a construction loan that had enough money in it to complete the project. We had to agree with them on the construction contract, who the general contractor was, and the general contractor had to put up a bond that would be sufficient, in our opinion, to complete the project. In addition to that, there had to be a 99-year ground lease with Tri-City on the Tri-City parcel, because that would ultimately be used as parking area, and that had to be assigned to you. And there had to be a joint use agreement for how that surface parking area would be used. There would have to be 50 spaces available to the public at no charge during the workday, and the balance of the lot would have to be available to the public during the evenings at no charge. And finally, we had to have approved with them what the document calls the final investment public budget. So we knew exactly what was going to be spent and how it was going to be spent. But in all circumstances, the public contribution was capped at $7 million, making an overall $10 million investment out of the $10 million credit line the city arranged to later be replaced with bonded tax increment supported debt. And the amount of increment to support that's already in the district now. It would not be necessary to come from this project. So at that point, we found ourselves in the circumstance of where we had the right to terminate the DVA, say the deal is off. Up until this point in time, we've been going back and forth about the appropriate way to handle the situation. On the one hand, the Clackamas Cove LLC and its member partners have put a significant amount of time and effort and their own money into advancing this project. They know it better than anyone else. So one would be motivated to say, let's extend the DVA and give them more time in this difficult economy. There's also a bit of fairness in that they've pursued this for so long with such energy that it's probably fair to take advantage of their work and let them continue to see if they can make this project happen. On the other hand, they were unable to meet the second set of conditions. And that inability to meet those means that the project is not yet certain. So we need to conservatively protect the $7 million of the Urban Renewal Agency and not rush to extend that document. So the recommendation that we've made I've made and been accepted by city staff, is number one, we don't remain in legal limbo. I don't like a situation where we're sitting there and a year or more or so goes by and people come up with all kinds of legal arguments as to what the effect is of that unclear legal limbo. So our recommendation is that we do two things, and I'm going to give you a document that does this and take you through that. Number one, we terminate the DVA. So there's no legal question about what's going on. But we enter into an agreement with them that says if you meet certain conditions and if things don't change that are material to the project and our investment in the next year, you will have a year to reinstate the development agreement as it may be modified based upon anything that changes. That's the basic concept. Let me give you a copy of the draft. I'm going to summarize this and walk you through it with reference to the paragraph. So if you start with page 2, section 1.1 makes it very clear that the DVA is terminated and they accept the termination and they waive any claim that it's not terminated. In section 1.2, CCLLC releases the agency from any possible claims they might assert or whether they know or don't know them. They've never asserted any claims, but this is what a lawyer would do to protect your interests, just to make everything straightforward and clean. Under section 2, the work product that you paid for and you got a security interest in, this provides a mechanism for you now getting physical possession and custody of that work product, so that if this is never reinstated, you have what you bargained for, which is the work product necessary for another developer to step up and not have to reinvent and reinvest in all of that work to move the project forward. Section 3 talks in general about giving them a period of until October 1, 2011 to reinstate the DDA. And 3.2 lists the conditions to reinstatement. On page 4, 3.2.1, they have to meet all of those contingencies in the second phase that they did not meet before. Those are the ones I summarized a couple minutes ago. 3.2.2 says that if they change anything about the master plan, which is the overall plan for the project, the phase 1 and phase 2 plan, which is what the work is that is necessary to deal with the land, recontour it, regrade it, and landscape it. If they change anything about that, if they change anything about the land use approvals they have, or if they change anything about the project information, which is other information that we've relied upon that they gave us, then we have to approve that in our commercially reasonable judgment as a condition of reinstating the agreement. The next thing is that the land use approvals that they have received can't have been revoked or terminated, or any permits they've received can't be revoked or terminated during the next year. Those have to remain intact. Next, the credit facility that we obtained. I wanted to make sure that if for any reason that credit facility were to expire on its own terms, or otherwise be terminated, and it would not be renewed by the bank, then you would not be committed to do this deal, because that's the source of the $7 million. Part of what they did accomplish was an agreement with ODOT dealing with ODOT streets and roads in the vicinity and modifications to those. If that ODOT agreement is modified or terminated by ODOT, you don't have to proceed, because that's a critical component, and ODOT's not within our control. Now, we had approved as part of phase 1 who these people were. We reviewed their financial statements. We reviewed the operating agreement of the company that is called Clackamas Cove LLC. In order to protect you from what might change in that between now and a year from now, if anything in that changes, they have to come back and get our approval of whatever has changed. I didn't want to see you committed to something that was approved back in 2009 that has now changed to 2011. Now, we also obtained a public bidding exemption, and the reason for that was because Clackamas Cove wanted to use its investment partner, Sladen Construction, to do the construction work. And they did not want to competitively bid the general contract, even though they agreed to competitively bid the subcontracts. That required a public bidding exemption, which was granted by the Urban Renewal Agency. And the reason for that was you have the contractor as the investor. That's different than anybody else. Nobody else is going to put up the investment money who was also a contractor. But the point I've made here is, if for any legal reason, by the time a year from now, there has to be another competitive bidding exemption, either because the first one expired or the conditions have changed from the grounds for the first one, then if it's legally determined another competitive bidding exemption has to be obtained, it has to be obtained, or else we don't have to go forward.
Question on that one?
Yes.
So what would happen if it's determined that we would record that exemption is not appropriate?
Then the entity, CCLLC, would have to competitively bid the general construction contract, as well as the subcontract.
So this gets renegotiated at that point? This particular aspect would get renegotiated? I mean, there may be legal requirements that will prevent the agency from issuing an exemption.
And if they come, CCLLC comes to us and says, if you don't give us an exemption, we won't do the deal. You are free to not give them the exemption and not do the deal. You have the bargaining power. And if we say we will only do the deal if there is competitive bidding of the general construction contract, and CCLLC says then we won't do the deal, then we won't do the deal. So you have a free hand to apply the normal legal standards for whether or not a competitive bidding exemption is to be issued. And then I've got another condition in here that is not, I would say, the most precisely worded condition I've ever drafted, but its breadth is to your benefit. 3.2.8. It says, recognizing that during the reinstatement period, that's the 1 year, things, circumstances, or conditions may change, or CCLLC may elect to materially modify the project. The parties shall, as a condition, the parties shall have entered into an amendment to the DDA, each in their respective good faith sole discretion, responding to any such changes or modifications that aren't otherwise addressed by other preconditions. And to cut through the legal words, if there's something we all haven't thought of today that could change in the next year, this will pick that up and give us the opportunity to say, well, wait a minute, we're not living with the old DDA. Something has changed. And we would have to negotiate, and they would have to agree before we'd be committed. Now, those are the conditions for them to exercise their right to terminate. But I've also provided provisions that say your right to reinstate goes away if any of these bad things happen. That's different than the conditions they have to meet in order to be able to reinstate. The reinstatement right goes away if CCLLC files bankruptcy, CCLLC gets a judgment against them for $10,000 or more and they don't pay it or bond it, CCLLC is dissolved, ceases doing business, Pacific Property Search, the people that have been at this the longest, are no longer part of CCLLC. Neither Sladen Construction nor Woodley Properties were the other current members of CCLLC. If either of them aren't members and we have not approved a replacement partner in CCLLC, the reinstatement right goes away. If for some reason you are no longer an urban renewal agency, then you're not obligated to proceed. And then if there's been a material physical change to the project site that impacts the cost, the financing, or the feasibility of the project, and we haven't agreed on how to deal with that, for example, there's a major flood, and the flood all of a sudden changes the contouring of the bank, and instead of taking $7 million to fix the current condition, it's now $12 million. And if we can't agree with them on how to respond to that, then their reinstatement right goes away. Finally, if you go to section 5 on page 6, what this says is that what can you do if other developers show up in the next year? And here's a business issue and what's fair. On the one hand, if we said in this agreement that you could make a deal with another developer, it would mean the reinstatement right that we are giving here to CCLLC would mean nothing. On the other hand, if you can't talk to other developers and you have to stand there in neutral for a year and CCLLC doesn't perform a year from now, you're going to say, well, why couldn't we at least have worked out a deal with some other developer that was conditioned on CCLLC not going forward? So this creates a balance. It says that during the following year, you can entertain proposals from other developers, you can meet with other developers or investors or users, you can talk with them, you can negotiate with them, and you can even enter into agreement with them, so long as the agreement has as a condition of its effectiveness there being no reinstatement by CCLLC. So giving you, I think, a lot of flexibility. It's not that we're trying to encourage other developers in competition with CCLLC, but if another developer knocks on your door, it will at least give you a chance to talk to them. If CCLLC succeeds and goes forward with the project a year from now, they prevail, they've got the DDA. If they don't, you will have had advanced opportunity to talk with other developers. So that's the summary of the document. And unlike the draft of the DDA for the rivers, which we have available for you, which is probably a few weeks away from coming to you again as a proposed document, this document is coming to you for your approval as a proposed final form document. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are you saying tonight? You were saying you were recommending that we vote on this tonight.
Oh, I'm recommending this to you tonight. When you vote on it is when you choose to vote on it.
Good questions. Which one are you doing? get down to. Okay. Is this it? Commissioner Neely?
You were talking about the security on the,
Product.
on the work product.
Right.
Could you expand on that?
The work product consists of a tremendous number of studies of many different disciplines of the site. Environmental studies, soil and water studies, transportation studies. It also consists of all kinds of engineered analyses of the conditions of the site, the soil, its geophysical capabilities, its load-bearing capabilities, water table location. It also consists of a number of engineered drawings as to how you would go about recontouring the site. There are landscaping plans. There are plans for the installation of Main Street, plans for the extension of Agnes Street. There are architectural plans for the entirety of the site, many of which you've seen renderings of. I'm sure there are hundreds and hundreds of emails and interactions between the consultants and the developers. There are probably various feasibility studies. There are risk assessment studies. And there may be more things than I can think of right now. That's the work product that if this group fails, you're going to want to have to give to the next developer and say, this is worth a lot of money. Here it is for you to use. It saves you spending the money, and we want to get credit for the value of this. So before, we had a security interest, much like a mortgage on that. Now under this document, we go get copies of all that. So we have the opportunity, both hard copies and copies of the electronic communications, so that you can put this into a series of big drawers somewhere in City Hall and know that you've got it. And you have the right to sell it, to use it yourself, to do what you want with it. Now, if they go forward with the project, they also have the right to use it, but only if they go forward. If they don't go forward, you've got the work product you bargained for to give or sell to somebody else.
Okay, next, Commissioner Walters.
Will we move from agenda item 5A to 5B without any opportunity for questions, and mine were related to that. So if you want to proceed to finish up with Mr. Janik, I don't have anything for him,
Okay.
and then we can maybe return to that.
Okay, Commissioner DeCedar.
I want to start with Mr. Janik first by following up on Commissioner Neely's question about the work product. Some of the items that this body paid for were work of the developer's own attorneys, Green and Murphy. And I'm wondering if he owns that work product. It seems to be a kind of a sticky situation where technically, since we paid for the work product of their attorneys, there might be some documentation subject to the attorney-client privilege. And I'm wondering how that fits into this plan.
Number one, I don't know that we paid for any of their attorney's work product. If we have, we would certainly have the right to that work product, and they would have to waive the privilege as long as the product was relevant to the project. So if their attorneys went out and got permits and their attorneys did work related to the project like that, we would get that.
Okay. Second question I have relating to this document is, want to give a scenario that I hope the fellow commissioners will consider regarding how to move forward with this proposed conditional reinstatement agreement. And I'm wondering if there could be a scenario by which the developers move forward in trying to find equity partners and financing to do their project, but at the same time, the commission or the city, or both the city and the commission cooperating, move forward separately but in tandem on some of the items that are currently planned for with the $7.5 million budget. For example, the environmental abatement of the east side of the cove where the Clackamas Trail is, I assume is eventually going to be, as part of this development, the goal is to clean that up. We've talked as a commission about some other things that the cove needs to be developed, including buttressing and stabilizing the peninsula. Commissioner Yule made the point during a recent city commission meeting that if that includes people in large, expensive condos are going to be looking down on a mudflat. So it seems that some of the work could proceed independently of these developers, perhaps in-house with the Urban Renewal Agency and the city, or with someone who's competitively bid to do that work, irrespective of the attempts of the developers to get financing for what they envision for this project. And I'm wondering if something like that could fit into the general structure and parameters of what you've outlined here.
Sure could, if you'd like it to. I've just never been aware that that would be something you might be considering doing out of the city's money in the next year. My goal here has been to protect the city from having spent any money over the course of the next year until the project was really ready to go forward. But I'm sure if there are elements like that that you want the ability to do, we would sit down and work it out with CCLLC, and it could readily fit in here.
Mr. Crocker?
First of all, I want to make sure that we do have time to get through the rest of this. I do want to talk about some of the other things. I know this is very important and I take it very seriously, but I want to make, there's other things that we need to be talking about as well with the rail and so on and so forth. The other question I had was, Pacific Property Services has done a great job with this cove thing, but now that it has, basically it's paused. Have we had any other developers come to us and say that shown any interest at all? No? Okay.
But I'm aware of.
All right. Okay. But nor if we put out an RFP or anything.
No, we haven't put out an RFP. Just curious if
Mrs. Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things I want to make sure we, and I haven't asked Mr. Janik about this specifically, but to ensure that the CCLLC has maybe it's one of these conditions here on page 4 that they revise their landscaping plan so that it is substantially consistent with the work that the city spent on the David Evans amendment. There was some we spent some money on enhancing the existing landscaping plan, and I just think that it would be beneficial to the city to make sure that there's an agreement that they will install or amend their landscaping to substantially comply with that.
That's fine. I was unaware of the David Evans study, so we can certainly add that in.
Commissioner Deedy?
Yes, there were a couple of things that come up in our discussion since with the DDA that I brought up. The city properties have been receptive to accommodating them, but they're not specifically in the current DDA. The two that I'm thinking about is the nature of the bicycle paths, swales, and walkways on Main Street, and the other was that the original plan did not have parking spaces near the trailhead. I talked to them and indicated that could be dealt with, but these are things that came specifically after the DDA was sent.
Mr. Williams.
If I may suggest, Chair, that this evening we really should report rather than to resolve details and negotiate, because you have not seen the document before, and the intent would be that the Commission would have the opportunity to explore any and all of the ideas that have been expressed. I'm just a little concerned about time to get
right. And Mr. Darrell, do you have a few?
Just a couple of quick comments. Just like Ed Darrell with Pacific Properties Commissioners. I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding as to the investment that the Commission made into 1.176. That was only paying for a portion of the work that was done. Prior to that, we had spent probably $3 million. We have a total of over $8 million invested at this time. So just to kind of clarify that, and we did already give all of the copies, everything to the city, so that's not a question. And this document is very acceptable to us. We look at it as primarily an extension that you have to perform. We expect to perform. I think the only thing that we found somewhat objectionable was under the Section 5, where it said you may engage in negotiations. To me, you can go out and talk with everybody you'd like to, but to formally go into an engagement and a negotiation would suggest to our partners that would be not so much partners that we have in-house, but when we go out to the financial community. It's not an easy thing to do to say that there's somebody else that's right there that's now negotiating with the city. I don't mind if you talk with everybody and you have ideas and you go back and forth, but to formally have a negotiated position, that's unacceptable to us. So I'd like that to be reconsidered. Other than that, the document's very acceptable. We're prepared to execute it and move it forward. And then just as a matter of course, since we've signed the DDA, we've invested about another $4 million. So we have not been sitting on the sidelines. Sladen is back in the picture, as I think that you know that. We've reconciled all of our issues. We've actually closed and moved forward with paying Parker several $1 million since that foreclosure was brought forward. So that's back in good stand at this point. So I think we're in a position at this time to move forward with this. I don't look at it as so much of a slap to us at all. I look at it as protecting the city and let us perform. We will do that. So we're prepared to move forward with this.
We needed to move back with some questions on the previous item, I think, that Commissioner Walters had. And we need.
Finish the presentation.
Okay. Well, I mean, does it relate to something earlier though that we could?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about the rivers. I don't know if it's the right night, but it seems like we have a lot of discussions about all the positive aspects of the project, but we never get to discuss the concerns.
We will pass out tonight, and which was being continuing this work today for the draft DDA for your consideration, and then presumably I think, is it on? I'll try to.
These are questions that are outside of the DDA.
Okay.
So I don't know that there's a, again, I think that there are a number of considerations that I've had for a long time and have never had the public opportunity to raise.
Commissioner, we can, it's certainly up to the commission if you want to have a work session, if you want to talk directly with me, I would be glad to do that. It's entirely up to the commission. We'd be glad to respond to any and all questions you have.
Shall we do that at our next meeting, put that on the agenda?
I'd like to.
In a lot of time, right now, we do have some people signed up to speak as well, so we don't have a lot.
If I may, I'd like to propose a work session that will not be a voting work session, but just a work session to just lay out all the concerns and ideas.
That's a good idea. Everybody agreeing with that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next, there's a couple of other projects.
How much time do you think we have? Because we do have some people signed up to talk, and I don't want to cut that out. I want to.
Okay.
But 5 minutes.
Okay.
I'm going to be talking about two things. Good evening, Commissioners. Two things with you this evening. The first is an application we recently submitted with Dan Brentwell and other members of the city through federal government to the Housing and Urban Development Department and Department of Transportation. And we titled that application the Oregon City High Capacity Transit and Urban Housing Strategy. And the intent was to take advantage of a new federal program that's a combination of HUD and DOT monies, and to build on a transit study that was done by Metro last year that looked, you can see in the graphic above you on your screens, about planned long-term high-capacity transit lines throughout the region, which could be max light rail or high-capacity bus or some other kind of high-capacity transit. And so you'll see on the bullet points up there the elements that we propose to be in the scope of work that the federal government would grant us. Go ahead. We requested $300,000. We submitted the application in August, and those decisions will be made by December this year. There will be a $50,000 city match. We were really excited about this program and this opportunity, and we acted on it quite quickly, as did any of the other cities that acted on it. But again, we tried to include a bunch of elements that we felt would be great for the city and that the federal government wanted to see. And those included looking at a number of elements of how to facilitate and build high-capacity transit and then build transit-oriented development around it. The other issue that I'll talk to you about is the rail quiet zone. This is something we've been talking about for months, perhaps years, and it was underlined by the recent work that you had done by last week or 2 weeks ago about downtown housing, where they pointed out the fact that there are at least 15 trains per day that run through the downtown and the intersection there, and that the horn sounds frequently. Excuse me. Sorry. And that clearly could be a deterrent for housing in the downtown, which is one of your desired goals. You don't want to have a train horn sounding if you're living in a condo right there. So essentially, we had Pearson Associates, go ahead, Dave, look at how a rail quiet zone might be implemented. This is something that's been implemented at about 7 intersections in Portland and now 8 intersections in 12. I'll give you the headline is that it is possible, but that further work is required. If it was successful, that would mean either no horn or a stationary horn at the intersection. There's some other approaches. This outlines another phase of work that would go into greater depth to determine what needs to be done to make the rail quiet zone possible. We'll be giving you tonight PDFs and a printout of Kittleson Associates recommended next phase of the work on that.
Thank you. Yeah. In terms of summary and recommendations from our firm as your advisors, some recommended next steps on the Cove is to review, refine, and adopt the Cove Conditional Reinstatement Agreement. This allows the activity level by Pacific Property Search to continue. It sends a positive signal to additional investors in the apartment, hotel, and office markets. The staff would work closely with Pacific Property Search to remove any remaining barriers, and that we have advised to not spend any more of the credit line until those conditions are met. However, Commissioner Nacita did introduce a possibility, so that's something you're probably going to want to take up in your work session. On the rivers, to review and define and adopt a development and disposition agreement with CenterCal. This in turn sends a very strong signal to Cabela's. They will only build one of these anchor stores, one of them in the state of Oregon, and other tenants that they are currently negotiating with. That the staff would work closely with CenterCal, Cabela's, and other tenants to move the project forward, and we would continue moving forward on the jug handle and other transportation improvements. With regard to the rail quiet zone, we would recommend that the Phase 1 investigation continue and explore the possibilities for enabling a quiet solution, which in turn is going to have a beneficial impact on attracting housing into the downtown. There's a piece of work that we are just getting started on having to do with controls. In the downtown, you have the comprehensive plan zoning, you have design guidelines. We're suggesting there might be an additional level of controls in the form of performance guidelines, which would be applicable to public-private partnerships and infusion of public capital into projects. We have done very little work on that and would hope to get back to you in the next month or so. And any other work that you would direct us to do, we're prepared to move forward under our contract. That completes our presentation tonight, and we're glad to answer any questions, or if you're going to take questions and comments from the floor, Chair.
Commissioner Nacita, you already made your comment, so we're clear on any commissioners have questions, comments. Thank you. Then we do have some public. Under 5C, okay. Well, no, we've gone beyond that. We're at 5C now, I believe.
This was an item that was brought up by Mayor Norris at the last commission meeting. Was the use of urban renewal funds, $10,000 for a public opinion survey on urban renewal projects. And the commission at the last meeting voted to move this item to tonight for discussion.
Okay, and I know you're not on the top of the list, but did you want to make comments if you're the one who initiated the request?
Yes, and I no longer wish to have that on the agenda. As I looked at the Chamber of Commerce survey, it really is a very strong reflection of what the business community thinks. 80% support for the Rivers Project and 90% support for the Cove Project, and I think that's good enough for now. We're going to have ongoing public hearings, and $10,000 is less than in a tight economy. Though it would be nice to have it, have an official opinion poll. But Mr. O'Brien sent a letter to two editors to ask people to send me ideas, and I got 3 responses. 2 of them said, spend it on the rivers of the coast, we love the project, and the other one said, spend it on more trails and hiking paths.
Okay, Commissioner West?
Well, I'm sorry, I hit the button too late. I was just going to comment that, to Mr. Leland and Mr. Janik and Pacific Property System. It was really good news tonight, and I'm glad to hear that things are still moving forward on the rivers and that there's some potential there again. That was just really exciting to hear. So thank you for the report.
Ms. Neely?
Just quickly, I mean, I think a poll is a great idea, but the fact of the matter is the poll results will not come in at a time that there could be any kind of real discussion between the commission, and I think that should be something that the next renewal commission consider.
Do we have any other commissioners? Then we have some members of the public who have signed up to talk. Mr. Flash, would you please come up? We just need the city you live in and your name. And Mr. O'Brien, would you want to come up so that when he's done?
My name is Casey Fletch. I live in Oregon City. I'm also a member of the Urban Renewal Budget Committee. I'm concerned about wasting money on a survey at this time regarding the urban renewal projects we've talked about tonight. These projects have been presented as done deals with rosy projections and assumptions based on not much more than things like, we've talked to Cabela's and there seems to be interest. Meanwhile, some members of the commission want to spend $10,000 on a survey of Oregon City residents about these projects. Since we've spent so much money on consultants to date, what questions are left for the citizens to discuss? Or is this survey just to make us feel good? Given that we'll have a new mayor, new councilors, and new members of the Urban Renewal Commission in 2.5 months, I believe the prudent thing to do would be to wait until our new city government is in place before spending money on a survey. I was happy to hear Commissioner Neely agree with this not long ago. Although $10,000 may not seem like much, wasting it on a survey at this time will further erode the public's confidence in urban renewal districts, a confidence you have abused during the entire process of the Cove and Rivers projects. Please wait to commission a survey until either the timing makes more sense or there are real questions to ask the public. Thank you.
Minutes of the September, item 5D. Well, he said that he didn't want to come. Is that right, Mr. O'Brien? Right. Thanks for catching me on that, Bill. Item 5, move a motion for approval of minutes to second. Do we have any discussion? But shall we do roll call too?
Commissioner Smith? Aye. Commissioner Nocita?
I arrived late, haven't seen this yet.
Commissioner Neely?
Aye.
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Commissioner Norris?
Aye.
Commissioner Crawford?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw? Commissioner Walters? Aye. Commissioner Peterson? Chair Flack?
Aye, that would be 9 in favor. Oh,
You just voted.
oh, I'm sorry. I thought we voted. Okay, well, so it is 9. Because the motion passes, so the minutes are approved. And the city manager's report, Mr. Frazier.
Thank you. I just want to confirm that then the staff will go forward and try to find an acceptable time for a work session for you and try to have some of the same folks back here for that so that all the questions, and if you have questions in advance you want to share with us so that we can prepare materials, feel free to do that as well. Also want to remind the commission I'll be out of town for training at the International City Manager Conference from October 9th to the 13th, and I'll be coming back late that night and back here on Thursday.
Is that it? Do we have anything else? And the meeting is adjourned.